Hey, you want to see something cool?
What's up, guys? Nathan Bennett, episode 84 for you guys. Got a lot to talk about today, but main thing, if you're wondering what today's episode is going to be, it's going to be about this. And this. And this. These are all the same thing. These are all... I got to make sure I don't show my address as I put it up, but these are all the same thing. These are all different forms of advertisement that I have been sent in just the past 2 weeks regarding Prop A and Prop B for San Antonio. Now, whenever I release this should be coming out on Monday, and if that is the case, then early voting has started as soon as I release this on October 20th. Now, I do want to discuss that a lot, as I am a Spurs fan, and I have a feeling that a lot of the people that watch this or subscribe to me are also Spurs fans, since that's how I've gotten a lot of my following and sort of my quote-unquote start, especially from help from other Spurs fans such as CJ Hoop Talks, Clan the Spurs fan, Swiss Eel, all of them. I have a feeling that a lot of people that watch me also are Spurs fans or are from San Antonio. But I also have a lot of people that watch me that aren't from San Antonio that it still affects them, because this is going to be a tax the tourist bill. And so I have some friends from Dallas and Houston that whenever there are conventions here or big Spurs games, they come here and pay for hotels to stay for 3 days or whatever the case is. So this is going to be sort of an overview of what Prop A and Prop B is, what it means, sort of a deeper dive than what a lot of the news will give you. However, I do have to state at the beginning, and I do want to make this abundantly clear and get this across, that anything that I say, not just in this episode but for channel wide, um, anytime I talk about like anything involving politics like this, involving the government, nothing I say should come as a denouncement or an endorsement in any way. I want to try and stay neutral. I will give you my thoughts, but I am not pushing you to vote in any way. I look to simply give you as much informed information as I can. I will give my thoughts on it. I won't say necessarily if I will vote yes or no, or who I will vote for in like another election or things like that. But I will give you my thoughts, and it is up to you to make your own decisions. I will not push you in any way. I don't want to seem like I am pushing a political narrative ever. So now that I got that little PSA out the way, just to clear some things up for some people, we'll go ahead and get started with it. I will be using my phone just because I do have some quotes written down by some people that I do not want to misquote. So please forgive me if I'm looking down and things of the sort. But let's go ahead and talk about exactly what Prop A and Prop B is. So to give sort of the overview of what everything is, um, the basics of it is that Prop A is a bill that will, if it's voted yes, it will increase hotel taxes by 2% for the Rodeo and Freeman Coliseum downtown, sort of make renovations to it, add parking spots. I can't remember if it's adding 8,000 parking spots or adding up to 8,000 parking spots. Like if it's 4,000, they'll add another 4,000. But it has to deal with adding 8,000 parking spots, things of that sort. They're going to expand the area that the rodeo has. There was talks that if they do that, they'll be able to use more land for possibly expanding to a San Antonio County Fair there on the rodeo grounds. There was talk about renovating an AC unit with the rodeo grounds in order to have different forms of livestock there and things of that sort. Prop B, ironically, even though this one is called B and the other one is A, Prop B actually seems to be the more popular one that gets a lot more media press about it. Even though if you put it in alphanumeric, it's Prop 1 and 2. It seems like Prop 2 is getting the more attention. Prop B is what I'm trying to say, which is kind of ironic. But what Prop B is that the Spurs want to build a new arena downtown. And there's a lot of pros and cons to this. Again, it's been getting a lot of media coverage. It's been getting a lot of negative press, positive press, a lot of people speaking out against it, a lot of people speaking for it. And I sort of want to give my take and sort of pass it on to you guys, all the information that I have. So I will start, I guess, by breaking down one of the most basic complaints about Prop B, and sort of Prop A. But again, a lot of this is going to be mainly focused on Prop B just because this is a basketball podcast and Spurs and everything. But I'll mention Prop A a little bit. But Prop B, a lot of people are concerned that this money that is coming from the city could be better spent elsewhere, right? It is 311 million, I believe, that is coming from the city. And a lot of people, Cops Metro and other groups, are saying that rather than spending this on a new arena, we have much more important problems in the city to take care of. We need to fix roads. We need to build more libraries, things of that sort, right? It should go back to the actual community of the city, not a new arena. And the problem with that is that this 311 million has already been generated from tourist tax. And what that means is when money is legally generated from tourist tax, it essentially has to go back to tourism. And I don't think a lot of people understand that. So that means that the money that we generate, the money that San Antonio generates, I should say, um, the money that's generated from tourist tax has to be spent back on tourism. So there's this 311 million. It's sort of people are giving it a use it or lose it mentality, which I think is sort of accurate because the money expires after a while and it can only be used on more what is classified as sports and entertainment because that money came from a tourist sports and entertainment source, right? So we have to use it on tourism venues. Now, there's another side argument to that where rather than if we do only have to use it on tourism and sports and entertainment, why not renovate the existing venues rather than building a new one? So there's argument there. And I do see that point. There's a lot to go in with that. Again, I'm just sort of setting the stage right now. With the other side, again, the side is use it on things like roads and libraries and the community. The other side is that you physically cannot spend the money on those types of things. It has to go back into sports and entertainment. And if it's not used, the money expires and it goes away. So I want to dive a little bit further into that. And I will find a few quotes. So I guess the best way to divide this up is we can talk a bit about for voting for Prop A and B and voting against Prop A and B, I guess would be the easiest way to do it rather than constantly going back and forth. So with voting for it, there's also a super sort of hidden aspect to it that isn't talked as much that I think would actually get a lot of people voting for it. And that is that in the contract with the bill, the Spurs and the city have a contract that's connected to this bill, right? So if the bill passed, then the contract goes through. And if it doesn't go through, then the contract is basically nullified. So as part of that contract and part of the bill, if Prop B is passed, then the Spurs have a non-relocation clause for 30 plus years, which I think is massive, right? Technically, there is a non-relocation clause with Frost Bank that says they have to stay here till 2032. However, there is a loophole and sort of footnote to that, to where if they claim that the conditions of the Frost Bank Center are not up to par, if they think it's not performing, they can defer themselves to looking to possible relocation. So it's sort of a relocation clause that has no grounding to it, because it's saying, yeah, you can't move out until 2032 unless you really want to, nobody's really going to stop you as long as you say, yeah, this doesn't work for us. So the whole non-relocation clause of Frost Bank doesn't really make much sense. Again, it has no backing to it, because they could just make up an excuse to want to leave and they can leave. With the contract with Prop B, it doesn't matter. There to my knowledge, there is no loophole like that. It is flat out, like plainly put, a timetable, and that is it. They will have a non-relocation clause for 30 years, no matter what, right? They'll have to figure out how to make the new stadium that's being built work. If not, they'll have to come up with some other way to renovate the stadium, or hopefully not build another one, which again I'll get into when I talk about the other side. But the point is, if Prop B passes, they will have to stay in San Antonio for 30 years, point blank, period, which is a huge backing for Spurs fans and things like that I don't think is talked about as much. Along with that, again, there's the huge talk about how if the city's spending all this money, right, it needs to go back into things like education, things like fixing the roads, that sort of thing. Again, in writing, the Spurs have to give 1.06 million. I have it written down here. Let me get my phone. They have to give 1.06 billion back to the city in general through different methods. And those involve things like education, and yeah. Here, I have it written down. In July 2025, Spurs Sports and Entertainment unveiled a proposed 1.06 billion total investment package. It was 500 million for the arena, so take that out. So it's technically 560 million towards everything else. but it's $500 million guaranteed for adjacent downtown real estate development. But again, we'll break that down, so just keep that in mind. But there's also $60 million in a combination of community benefits, which include things like 500 tickets must be $25 or less for every Spurs game, which is huge. I'll talk about that as well. And there has to be 30% of construction contracts for the arena to go to local companies. There has to be transit for at least 2,000 fans. And there is the rest of the $35 million of that $60 million will be dedicated to expanding early childhood education in San Antonio for over 20 years. So I don't want to get too personal. And again, I am not going to push anyone to vote anyway. But $35 million dedicated to expand early childhood education actually also impacts me directly, because my girlfriend who lives with me does work at a preschool in San Antonio, which means that if that money is going to early childhood education in San Antonio, that potentially means more money coming into the household, right? Which is good. And obviously that doesn't just go for me. That goes for all of the people that work in that sort of area, right? And with the $500 ticketed at $25 or less, I will address that more when I talk about against, because a big issue with the pushback on that has to do with the parking, which I'll get into. But Spurs would pay rent to use the new arena, which would offset a lot of the city's contribution, which is $489 million, and that would be through a lease. I'm a little iffy on that because there are a lot of leasing agreements with sports arenas like this that typically don't go very well, especially if the team is not selling the tickets and making money. And I think right now it's not necessarily an issue with the Spurs, it's an issue with the NBA. I have a feeling that the NBA is going to not lose money, because they'll still be making a profit with their streaming deals and things like that. But they're going to lose a lot of viewership. I'll put it that way. They might not necessarily lose money, but they're going to lose a lot of legal viewership. That was one of my recent videos that I put out. So if you haven't seen that, go check that out. And I essentially talked in that video about how piracy is largely back on the rise. That's no secret. It's been talked about with the NBA and other sports for the past few years, and especially with them signing new deals. It's back in the conversation about how people are going to pirate a lot of games. And if people can pirate the games for free, that means that they're not going to watch the games legally. They're not going to buy tickets as much unless they want to see the game live. And if they're not going to see the game live, that also means less concessions sales, less jersey sales, and it sort of trickles down, right? And whenever a team can't pay the lease for their arena, it causes a huge number of issues. And I know a lot of people have been making this connection to the SuperSonics with how the public there, how they asked for a new arena in Seattle and they didn't get it, and then they relocated, right? And I will say there are massive similarities and massive differences to that whole thing. But a huge issue with the Supersonics and why they wanted to get a new arena was because they had a leasing agreement for their current arena that was making zero money. They could not pay their leasing agreement, and because they couldn't pay their leasing agreement, they had to balance the budget sheet, which meant taking the money out of players' contracts in order to pay the lease, which meant worse players. Worse players meant that they had less audience. Less audience meant less money to pay the lease again. And they sort of got caught in this death cycle where if you can't pay the lease for the arena, your team is essentially just locked into doom, because again, you get into the cycle where you have to pull the money from somewhere, and that typically means from player contracts. But if you can't give money to player contracts, you're going to have worse players, and then that leads to a worse team, which has less people watching it, which means less money, which means more pulling out of player contracts, and so on. So I'm not a huge fan of lease agreements because I know the danger that puts teams in. However, a massive difference with the Supersonic Arena proposal is that the city didn't want it. The city council are the ones that denied the arena. They didn't even put it to a society, like a community vote, county vote. They brought it to city council, and the city council denied it because they said that there was such a huge importance on education in Seattle and things of the sort. The difference here is that the city is on board. Now it's up to the citizens, and the citizens are hugely split right now. UTSA did their own polling, not official polling, but just to like survey what people think, and it's very split when they did the survey. When the survey came out, I believe it was 45 no, 45 yes, like very split, and then that extra 10% voted not sure. So it's very split down the middle. And again, that's why I wanted to get this video out, to sort of convey this information to you guys. Just make sure that you guys are as informed as you possibly could be as early voting starts and everything. Again, a lot of people are comparing it to Seattle as well, because there's the risk of relocation, which I just brought up, because again, the relocation clause that is currently in place for Frostbank isn't exactly solid. And if they're already looking into this Prop B stuff, that means they already have some numbers to back up that Frostbank isn't renovated or up to par, which again they would use for their reason for relocation, right? And again, people compare it to the Supersonics because it's like, okay, if you don't give us the stadium that we want, we're gonna move, right? And there was some interviews with people from the Spurs that have talked about how they've talked about how they were asked, if Prop B doesn't go through, are you going to look into relocation? They were asked that direct question, and they didn't answer the question. They dodged the question. They reworded the question. They gave a answer that was different than the question that was asked after the question had been asked 3 times to them. And I think that any time that you're given a direct question like that and you dodge it, then you already know what the answer is, right? That's not me here to fearmonger to Spurs fans, but to me, on the outside looking in, watching the interview, and the interviewer even like sort of aggressively pushed him and said, like, noticed he was dodging the question and said, why can't you just answer the question? And the interviewee once again like dodged the question, didn't answer it, and just said we are very much hoping and optimistic that Prop B goes through, but kept refusing to answer what would happen if Prop B doesn't go through. And again, I think that indirectly answers the question that if Prop B does not go through, they may look for elsewhere, which is really disappointing because San Antonio, huge part of it is the Spurs. Like, Spurs culture is interwoven with Hispanic culture, which again is a huge part of this city. Um, San Antonio is sort of like I saw somebody say that San Antonio is what made the Spurs. And I think that there are a lot of ways where that is correct because I've talked many times about how the Spurs' values are family and community. And San Antonio, again, it's interwoven with a Hispanic culture, which has a lot of that as well. Um, and it's interwoven into how Pop coached the team with family and culture and community. And so it's just I don't know. It's a lot to think about. Obviously the question is if they were to relocate, where would they relocate to? I think the obvious one would be Austin because they still stay in Texas. They're still on that I-35. Apparently there's already been communication with the Austin mayor. Um, and they already have the G League up there. And again, they've been making pushes to try and gather the fans there, build a community there. And KSAT 12, which is our local news station in San Antonio, for those of y'all that are unaware, did a report on it talking about how there have been text communications between Spurs and public officials in Austin, because when you message public officials, those messages do not get to stay private. Apparently, there's some sort of law that if you message a public official or anyone in office, those texts are available to the public for them to cover on the news and things like that. And so they got a hold of them, and there was a lot of text about the Spurs being excited to meet with public officials with Austin. They went and had dinner together. They went to business parties. Had a drink together on multiple occasions, things like that. And this could just be as some other people have put and how some other news sources have covered. It could just be a typical normal business meeting about wanting to sort of bring more Spurs community to Austin. Again, the G League stuff is up there in Austin, but a lot of more conspiracy or skeptical people have been diving into it to say, like, well, they may be trying to push themselves more into Austin territory, sort of build themselves there so that if push comes to shove, they can relocate there. And I'm not a huge conspiracy theorist or anything, but I do think that may be possible, especially because, again, I like to learn from the past and take that sort of as a lesson. And again, it's the same thing with Seattle. How with Seattle, they talked numerous times about how we want to stay in Seattle. Um, we have no urges or plan to relocate anywhere. And they promised that over and over until the emails came out where the owner of the Seattle Supersonics was already messaging David Stern, was already messaging people in OKC, messaging other people within the Seattle organization about trying to move to Oklahoma. And so that became a huge controversy about how he basically lied and said they weren't planning to relocate when they were. And those emails and communications came out that showed they had a back and forth to go to OKC. And so, again, it just kind of puts up the red flags for me knowing the history there. So, but let's go ahead and dive into more. I do want to read out sort of the ads that I got so that you can hear it more from the horse's mouth. There's been a big controversy about how a lot of the city has been pushing uh, these advertisements as well. These advertisements come from the Spurs, but the city has also been doing its own advertising, and that has gotten a lot of negativity and controversy, seeing as how the city is not pushing neutral or informed advertising. They're pushing more because the city wants this to pass. They're pushing advertising in favor of Prop B when more people are saying that there should be neutral advertising um, in different places. So I kind of agree there. Everyone should be informed and educated and sort of more neutral going in to voting. And again, that's why I'm doing this. I just want everyone to stay informed. So from there, a little pamphlet that I have here. Um, again, I need to cover my address, but they got this big pamphlet that goes through all the different numbers that it says 5 numbers that every San Antonio should know, right? And you open it up and it says $0, no cost to San Antonio homeowners or renters. This arena will be funded by visitor taxes, not property or sales tax, which is huge because again, a lot of people. Again, I don't want to get too political, but the economy is not great right now. People don't want the money to come out of their taxes. They want to make sure they're getting their full check. It says 2%. That's what the county will charge tourists and hotel occupancy taxes. It is a 1/4% increase from the current 1.75 tax rate. Now, again, I also think that's important to note because we already have a huge tourism tax in San Antonio. We've been doing tax a tourist for a while. That's how we got the Alamo Dome passed in the first place because a lot of people didn't want to vote on the Alamo Dome until they said that it was coming from tourist taxes. And that's how we built the Alamo Dome in I think it was 1990, 99, something like that. Um and that was a huge selling point was that the money was coming from tourists as well. And so we already have a pretty high tax rate for tourists in San Antonio already anyway. So it's not too much of a change. I saw that with this 2% increase, it would be a total of 17% with hotels, I believe, or something like that. Um, which means if you are staying at a hotel for $100 a night, you're paying 117 actually, which is interesting. But again, if you're already coming to San Antonio to go to a convention or whatever the case is, you're already expecting to spend a bit of money anyway. So, 12 million is what the rodeo raises in scholarships and youth education every year by helping the rodeo grow. We hope raise even more money for local students. 2.1 billion what the Spurs and their partners are investing in San Antonio. So again, that's a huge number that's been talked about that the Spurs along with the stadium or as part of the stadium they're investing 2.1 billion total. So they're investing 500 million of their money into the stadium, but they're also having to put it into development. And they also are talking about how they are they keep talking about how much the Spurs are putting in. So on the other side here it says $500 million directly towards the cost of the arena construction, an additional $1.4 billion in downtown development, creating good jobs and new revenue for the city and the county to reinvest in San Antonio. So keep that in mind. I'll talk about that more in a minute. The Spurs have committed another $75 million to community benefits initiatives and are covering 100% of cost overruns. The Rodeo and Spurs are two of San Antonio's biggest assets. For years, they have shared the Frost Bank Center. Now it's limiting the growth of both entities. By creating a new downtown arena for the Spurs, the rodeo gets the chance they need to expand. And the more they grow, the more funds they raise for Future Farmers of America and other student scholarships. The arena project is a public private partnership between the city, the county, and the Spurs. Prop A and Prop B will allow the county to pay its share by raising the hotel occupancy tax to 2%, and the city will be allowed to keep the state's portion of the hotel occupancy tax to pay for their share. So that's one of the pamphlets. And then there's also basically the same thing. It says $0 what Spurs it's $0 what families pay, and then 2.1 billion what the Spurs pay. And then with this one, it's got a nice little chart here. And it shows, are you an owner of the Spurs? You can't really see it with the glare, but it says, are you an owner of the Spurs? No, then you don't pay. And it goes through like this little decision tree, which I think is really cool. But it also says, you got questions, we got the answers. The bottom line on props A and B. You've heard the talk about new downtown arena in San Antonio, but how much will it cost and who pays for it? Here are the facts. Who pays? The Spurs are paying $500 million out of pocket for construction costs alone. Tourists pay the bulk of the rest through a small tax every time they stay in a San Antonio hotel. The city raises additional money through leases and revenue from new development. It will cost $1.3 million, and the Spurs are on the hook for 100% of cost overruns. Who will own the arena? The city of San Antonio will own the arena. The Spurs will pay to lease it. It's a hotel tax paid by tourists and visitors, not San Antonio families. See the ballot language for yourself. And it has a small cut up of what will be on the ballot. And it says, do you vote to 1, increase the county hotel occupancy tax to maximum rate of 2% for the purpose of financing the Coliseum Complex venue project? That's for Prop A. It says a Coliseum Complex venue. That would be Freeman Coliseum. And then it says for Prop B, do you vote 1, to increase the county hotel occupancy tax to a maximum rate of 2% for the purposes of financing the arena venue project? And now those three have been from the Spurs. As I said, they have been pushing a lot of stuff for Prop B. I did actually get something from Prop A for once. And this is for the rodeo, which I don't really go to the rodeo as much as I live in San Antonio. And so I'm not really too concerned with Prop A. I'm not a rodeo person, but I'll read this one out as well. It says tax on tourists, yes, but no tax on San Antonio families. And then it says read the ballot language for yourself. And then it has the same Prop A, Prop B subsection that I read to you just a minute ago. And it says the San Antonio Rodeo contributes over $300 million to our economy and over $12 million supporting youth education every year. So we think it's fair to ask tourists to chip in a few dollars more for a hotel stay in order to keep San Antonio growing. So again, that's what they say from the horse's mouth. But again, they are advertising for it, so they're going to use pretty language. They're going to do what they can. But there are pros and cons to this. I've talked a lot about the sort of the pros so far. Again, keeping the Spurs for 30 plus years, the money that goes back into education and other things. The negatives for this that people have talked about is that this would be the third arena that San Antonio is doing, right? We've gotten the Alamo Dome. We've done Frost Bank Center. This would be the third. And because of that, it's going to limit the revenue from the other two areas. And it also says that it also means that people are worried because if we don't like this third one, then what are we going to do? Build a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, and so on, rather than renovating what we have, right? So that's another huge issue that people have. They're also worried about the money going back into the community, right? Because again, that was something with the Alamo Dome and the Frostbank Center that was promised as well. Was if you vote for this, money will go back into the community. And again, that was sort of the quote unquote promise, but it was never in writing. So it was used as a voting material in order to promote people to vote yes for it. But it was never contractually uh, contractually obligated. Um, and so all this money was sort of the economic economists came in, said, "Hey, this is how much money that an arena can make if we build it here." And people saw that and they thought it was promised and they thought all this money was going to go back into the community, and it never really did. With the stadium, right? With this new one, it's not a vote yes on it and the stadium starts being built immediately, which I think is what a lot of people have in their mind. The the 1.4 billion, the Spurs have promised 1.4 billion in community development as part of this, right? And that has to be completed before any stadium gets built. That is put in the contract, and so now it is promised to put a lot of people from San Antonio at ease. They're projected, I believe, to not start building the stadium until 2030. I think it's a few years from now. It's not until like excuse me. It's not until the 2030s, I believe. The Spurs have to show that $1.4 billion of development has gone into that site that they're going to build it before they can even build it. They have to prove that that community benefit has been put in. And again, like I just read from the Rodeo pamphlet, there's a bunch of studies that have talked about how an arena would bring jobs, bring more economy to these areas, and a lot of people are skeptical of that because other studies have said that it would only bring a max of 100 jobs to that area, which is a very small percentage of San Antonio. I read a report that worded it saying 100 jobs out of the 1.5 million people that live in San Antonio is basically nothing, percentage wise, which is very true. And there's also another economist that said that sports stadiums are almost always a net zero for cities, because they could generate all of this money, right? Like how the rodeo generates 300 million. However, with the amount of tax money that's going into it to not just be built, but maintain it over the years, and then potentially renovate it in another 10 years or whatever the case is, it is almost always a net zero. Even with how much money it generates, it will not see the same amount of money generated that goes into it. It very rarely actually contributes to more economic growth in the area, as history has told us. This is also one of the biggest publicly funded arenas. There's arenas like the Clippers one, and I can't remember the other one off the top of my head, that were 100% privately funded, and then most of the other ones like Milwaukee, Dallas, they're up to 50% publicly funded. And then with this one, through the tourism tax plus the city coming in, when you combine the county and city together, it would make up 68% of how much is going into this um, 1.3 billion that is going to build the arena. However, again, Spurs are on the hook for 100% of overturn. So basically, what that means is that on paper, the bill is calculated that it will cost 1.3 billion. If any dollar amount over that 1.3 billion, the Spurs will have to pay it. So if it's 1.4 billion instead of 1.3, then the Spurs will have to pay the extra 100 million. And I'm trying to think of what else I haven't covered yet. I'm just going through my notes to make sure I didn't lose anything. They're going to again they're talking about adding restaurants, hotels, and stuff like that down there, but there's skepticism to how much money that will generate. So that goes into the development costs that I told y'all to keep in mind. The other one is I said to keep in mind the $500 for our 500 tickets for $25 or less. So a huge problem with that is that on the diagram of how they want to build the arena, the Spurs would own a lot of the parking that is downtown now, like near the Tower of Americas and things like that, which means that if you're parking for the convention center, parking for Tower of Americas, I believe that would go towards the arena. Um, and also, um, they are more than likely going to charge more for parking to make up some of that money. Because if they have to mark down a specific number of tickets to a certain price, and they have and they own the parking lot, they are going to probably charge they're going to upcharge for the parking for the arena. That gets a little fishy and confusing because again, they say the city is the one that owns the arena, but the Spurs are leasing it. So I don't know how that is going to work, but I do believe that they are going to upcharge parking, um, which will definitely be interesting. So that's one of my other points that I had is that they're going to try and make those money from the $25 or less tickets elsewhere. I do like that they are going to reportedly they're going to boost the transportation to that area, which I think will really help. Um, One of my first memories of going to a Spurs game, me and my family, we rode the bus because we didn't live in San Antonio at the time. We drove to the bus stop and then had the Via buses take us to the Frost Bank Center, which at the time was the AT&T Center. So I definitely think that would be good. I've definitely seen some other people that have said that the $25 or less tickets doesn't matter because again, with the city, or not the city, with the economy being so bad right now, and especially again with where they're building the area being a large African American and Latino population, a lot of people have been talking about how they have more important things to worry about. Saying I saw reports that were saying like even if they lower the tickets, obviously before going to a Spurs game or any sort of entertainment, paying for food, paying for school, making sure your rent and mortgage are paid, those are always going to come first. Um, and those have been taking a big um, hit recently just because of the economy and everything. Um, but I think I don't want to end it prematurely. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. So I have written down in my notes, why vote yes? Because it's 30 more years of the Spurs. Adds the state of the art arena, which comes with new parks, new businesses, new housing, new restaurants. Um, it's supposed to be an estimated 318 economic output from the district that the arena is being built in, and it makes San Antonio seem like a big city compared to other cities. So that's an argument that's made a lot, is that San Antonio is more of a smaller market, so this puts us less in the small market um, category and sort of moves us up a few rungs. And a lot of the money comes from the Spurs being funded by the tourist and things like that. Why vote against it? Because it still is coming from taxes. Um, a lot of people are saying it's, quote, corporate welfare for billionaires. Again, this was a huge argument that was with Seattle. I have a Seattle video coming out soon, but that's one of the quotes from that video as well, is that they felt like the owner of the Supersonics was a billionaire that was asking for money when he's a billionaire, which a lot of people didn't like. People are doubtful on the economic benefits. Um, Again, independent economists and academic studies spanning over 30 years conclude that sports stadiums do not drive significant net economic growth. There's other priorities that are being neglected, like improving public transportation, fixing streets, but I already talked about that, how that money cannot be used. A big one is it's a rushed process and therefore lack of transparency. It was deliberately rushed in order to try and get a vote. There's So people think it's going to be a back alley handshake with some stuff in the contract and the bill that's not being told. It's being rushed, which means it's going to be less stuff told to the public, and potentially some things that people don't want. And a lot of people are talking about supporting Prop A but rejecting Prop B. That comes with a lot of a big mess that sort of needs to be intertwined or untwined, because Prop A and Prop B are so intertwined, unfortunately, that if you prove one but not the other, it becomes sort of complicated. So a lot of people are grouping these together, where you either vote yes on both or no on both. And the Spurs, again, I talked about that interview where the person with the Spurs front office was interviewed by the San Antonio Express News, and he talked about what are you going to do if Prop A goes through but not Prop B and things like that. And again, he sort of dodged the question, just like relocation, where he said we're optimistic that both will go through. And it seems like if they if one goes through and not the other, then it's going to get very messy and very complicated, because again, Prop A has to deal with expanding the rodeo, and a huge part of that would be sort of shrinking the Frost Bank Center, because they're going to get the new arena with Prop B in order to displace the Spurs in order to make room for the rodeo. But if the Spurs aren't moving, then and they're staying in Frost Bank Center and Prop B doesn't pass, then that becomes an issue of how Prop A is even possible, because then they won't have the land and things like that to they won't have as much room with the Frost Bank Center to do what they need to do with Prop A to begin with. So let's see how long I've been recording here. And then if it's been over 45 minutes, I'll go ahead and end it there. I was going to talk about WNBA, the stuff that's going on there, all the controversy, and then also some things to watch out for before the season starts, because the season starts in 2 days. Or if I post this on October 20th, then it'll be starting tomorrow on Tuesday. But Again, if I've been recording for a while, how long have I been recording? Recording for 55 minutes. So I think I'm going to go ahead and call the episode there. And then I will talk about the WNBA stuff. And the season will have started by then. And we'll talk about all that stuff there. So I will go ahead and leave this episode there after me ranting about all the Prop A and B stuff. I'll make a full video on Prop A and B as well. But I thought it would be good for me to just kind of riff on it, all the information that I have for a podcast episode for you guys to stay informed and all that. So I hope you guys stay informed and enjoyed. And yeah, cop the merch down in the description as well. I try and wear it every podcast episode so you guys can see it. We also got one of the hats up here. So go check that out. We also have SeatGeek code in the description. You can use code Nathan Burnett to get $20 off your first ticket bought from SeatGeek. So definitely go check that out as it does help me out. And check out my other links, like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Nathan Burnett, episode 84.
This is not okay. This needs to stop now.